Good morning once again. It's a good pleasure to welcome you to the first session of the Innovation Stage at South Summit Korea 2024. My name is Yusu Kim, and I'm honored to be your MC for today. Today's first session will be a panel talk titled The Challenges of Innovation-Based Enterprises in Crossing Borders, with insights from leaders at Draper Startup House, Draper Nation, and KILSA Global. The moderator for today is Aaron EVERHART, country lead at Draper Startup House, Vietnam. The panelists are Vikram BHARATI, founder at Draper Startup House, and Saeyoung, CEO at Draper Startup House. So let us welcome the panelists with a big round of applause. Great. So Aaron, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. It's so exciting to be here at South Summit Korea 2024. I had a chance to walk in here last night when it was all quiet and look at the booths and imagining the crowds coming today, and I can see the hall is starting to fill up, and it's very exciting. So welcome to our session, and today we're going to be talking about how entrepreneurs and startups can be crossing borders and some of the challenges and opportunities that we have for them. Representing Draper Startup House and Draper Nation, the CEO and founder of both of these organizations, I have to my left Vikram Bharati. Welcome, Vikram. And I will let each panelist share a little bit about themselves. And over here we have Saeyoung Lee, who is the CEO of Draper Startup House Seoul, and also Draper Startup House Korea, having the franchise for the nation. And so before I talk anymore, why don't you all give us a sentence or two about your background and why are you here on this stage together today?
I'm here today because we are launching a Draper Startup House in Korea, which is going to be done by Saeyoung. And that's one of the main reasons I'm here. But also to explore the Korean market and a little bit about myself. I am on a quest to build startup societies around the world. I started doing this about 5 years ago, and now we have these startup houses in 20 countries around the world, and so we can talk about that. But that's what I'm focused on at the moment, as well as I'm building Draper Nation, which is a new digital country, and we can also maybe talk about that later.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Saeyoung Lee. I'm currently leading the Draper Startup House Korea. I have accumulated 20 years the business background in Seoul, Korea, and the global market. And then, first of all, I've worked in the consultancy in Bain, BCG, and ADL. And also, I drive some digital innovations in IBM and ADL, the AI Korea. And then lastly, I've created 2 companies, and I exited 1 company. And nowadays, I joined the Draper Startup House Korea to contribute the growth of the Korea startup communities. Thank you.
Okay, so I often tell entrepreneurs that money follows opportunity. Because a lot of entrepreneurs come to me and they're asking me, how can I get investment? And the first thing I say is money follows opportunity. First, you have to create the opportunity, and then the money will find you. Don't worry, just create an awesome opportunity. That's a little bit simplistic. Tim Draper, the founder of the Draper Venture Network, under which Draper Startup House lives, wrote a book called How to Be the Startup Hero. And in the book, he predicted that in the future, nations will be competing for citizens. Okay, so now we see the case that with the advent of the internet and the possibility of remote work, a lot of founders are wanting to cross borders. They're wanting to travel to different countries where they might find favorable tax situation, or they might just find a favorable culture that they might like to live in. So money follows opportunity when it's not too difficult to follow. So it may be difficult to cross borders, both for the investors and for the founders. And so today our topic is what are some of the challenges, and also how, speaking on behalf of Draper Startup House as a startup in itself, how we cross borders and how we have some opportunities that may make the future better. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to ask Vikram, what inspired you to create Draper Startup House, and how has the franchise model helped in expanding your network globally?
Well, the main reason for starting the company was I saw a gap in the market where the startup industry was either funded by governments or were funded by nonprofits or funded by non-private entities. And I felt that the opportunity was to actually create a vehicle by which you can create a lot of these opportunities around the world, and I figured that it would be better to do it as a private enterprise and not rely on government handouts or not to rely on nonprofits. So we created a commercial model where the foundation is very much it's a business, and I think that is more sustainable in the long run. So that was the motivation for starting the business. And in terms of the franchising model, I think it's working well. It's new. Saeyoung is doing one in Korea, so you can ask him. But I think it's been a good vehicle for our expansion. We're in 20 countries, and I think we're just starting. And if people see value in what we're doing, they'll want to do it in their cities. There's another.
Yeah, thank you, Vikram. Saeyoung, as the franchisee for Draper Startup House in Korea, what challenges have you faced in adapting Draper Startup House to the local market?
Yeah, very good question, Aaron. But can you hear me? Because there are some noises. Yeah. So the biggest challenge, I am thinking that would be understanding the customer, especially in Korea, because South Korea is truly dynamic country. So in a short period, the numerous startups are emerging, and the ecosystem for everything, like from the startup creation to investment, the exits, is very well established. So also the most notably is the market has seen very explosive growth due to that, based on that support from the government. So that is very notable things. But however, one challenge that make Korean startups face is globalization. So that's the topic we are talking right now. So while the number of unicorns and many investment arises, also the many quantity of startups are competitive compared to the global market. But the percentage of revenue from the global market is pretty much low. For example, the portion of the global revenue of the Korean startups are below the 7%, 8%, compared to Israel, US, German startups shows that above the 20 or 30%. So that's the major, the compelling the reason why we are here to support the Korean startups. So of course, globalization is not the every topic to the every startups, but given the rapid growth and the matured market stage in Korean market, we need to think about, the startups should think about how to globalize their business models. So that's the major topic we're thinking right now. So to support the Draper Startup House leverages our global network as the Vikram's built, and also we are going to act as a kind of navigator to find out the right partnerships in the local market. And also we are aimed to help the Korean startups to appeal to global investors, how to source the right investment from the global investors. And also we are going to support that, how to serve the customer needs of in each local market. So most importantly, we are going to help them establish what is the right business model to serve the right the market in the global market. So that's the major topic I am thinking. Yeah.
Great. So now I want to ask both of you, and either one of you can answer first. What are the most significant barriers that startups encounter when entering new markets? And how could they overcome this in the future? Are there any innovations that the masses haven't yet heard about that you might are not thinking about? For example, Draper Nation that you might like to talk about. Maybe Saeyoung, you can talk about barriers that Korean startups have when they're trying to enter new markets. I have a lot of experience through KILSA Global with Korean startups wanting to enter the Vietnam market. So tell us, what is your experience on that front?
So when you think about the entering the global market, the biggest challenge is understanding the customer. So while the customer needs may not differ drastically from the country to country, but the key points to understand is there are subtle differences in terms of customer needs. So intensity of pain point or the timing at the customer needs are arise, or there may be slight variation in each country. Especially in the market like Korea, the customer mix are very much homogeneity. So we have very high intensity of homogeneity, which means that it may not be easy to enter this market with a general level of the sense, general level of business model. So additionally, the service tailored to meet the needs of Korean customers may very much the barriers when they expanding into global markets. So this is no different to all the startups. So understanding the local market customer needs is the key point to successfully with the market entry. That's the number one. And the number 2 point is, as you mentioned, that it is essential to consider the channels. So there can be the various channels like promotion, marketing, and sales. So to scale up, the channel is the very important tool to leverage how to increase our revenue, our branded exposure to the market. To find out the right channels, it can be very critical to figure out who is the right partnerships to our company. So in that case, maybe KILSA, what Draper Startup can be the very right the partnership to figuring out who is the right person, who is the partners to secure that right channels in terms of marketing, sales, and promotion or distribution. So that's the key things I'm thinking. So when you think about the entering into the global market or entering into the Korean market, these kind of the barriers can be solved through the right partnerships with KILSA or Draper startups, etc. So that's the thing, yeah.
Okay, Vikram, I'll ask the question again. What are the barriers that, in your experience with Draper startup houses around the world, what are the significant barriers that startups encounter when they're trying to enter new markets, and how could they overcome that in the future?
So I like to think of markets slightly differently. I think the biggest challenge is to think that there is many markets. I actually think we've come to a point in the global economy where essentially there's one market. And the market has different segmentations, which are different countries, different languages and cultures, but essentially it's one big market. And I think if you sort of if you frame markets as one big market, then it becomes a lot easier to then think about how to expand to different parts of the market. And I work in the world of early stage startups, and what I've seen is a lot of the early stage startups look at the world with the eye there's many, many different markets, and which is actually not necessarily the case anymore. It may have been the case in the past when we had, we didn't have the informations about it, but now it's all available. All the information is available, all the access is available. Things move very fast. So I think the biggest challenge is to look at the world as many different markets. And so maybe a way to look at it as one big market, and that may help in terms of just framing it slightly differently.
Saeyoung, you mentioned the partnership with KILSA Global was important to get where you are today with the Draper Startup House franchise. For you, what role do partnerships and networks play in supporting the growth of startups in Korea? Sure, I'll ask one more time. What role do partnerships and networks play in supporting the growth of startups and Draper Startup House here in South Korea. Perhaps you can touch a little bit on the story behind KILSA Global and Draper Startup House.
Yeah. So when you set up the Draper Startup Korea, we had a partnership with KILSA Global. The reason we have partnership with KILSA Global is to make a gateway to the global market using the KILSA network for that Korean startups. So this is a very critical the partnerships to our business model because in Korea it is hard to find out the right incubation centers to support the globalization for the startups, Korean startup company. So as I mentioned the earlier part, currently we have a bunch of startup market and big startup market in Korea. During the last decade, we had a tremendous growth, but especially in terms of globalization, it is still limited. When you think about the globalization, how we can find out the right partnership in the local market. So Draper Startups want to give the access to the global market using the various partnerships like KILSA and the other global Draper network and Draper nations and Draper associates. So using those partnerships, we can open the gateway to the Korean startups, how to figure out the market potential, market opportunities, and how to understand the customer needs in the local market. And then who is the right partnership in each local market. So this is a very much critical factor, critical key capabilities we can make for the Korean startups. So that is how to build the right global ecosystems in the Korean startup market. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So the hall is filling up, and I can feel the excitement out there in the booths and other stages. And some of you came a little bit late. No worries. This session is being professionally recorded, and our audio is going right into the recording, so you'll be able to hear the whole program today later on video. So I have a final question, and this is for Vikram, and then after that we'll take some Q&A from the audience. Vikram, you mentioned Draper Nation, and also we're here at this Deep Tech and AI conference. So I would like to hear a little bit more about Draper Nation and what are some opportunities leveraging AI using within Draper Nation itself. Thank you.
Sure. So since this is a deep tech and AI conference, I'll maybe try to frame it in that context. When I look at the analog world and I look at the digital world, it's very clear that technology has changed every industry in the world. So let's look at communications. I mean, we used to communicate with fire and smoke and with pigeons sending letters. That was the analog world. But today we communicate with our phones all over the world. Entertainment used to be watching puppet shows, and now we're entertained digitally. So every single industry, whether it's finance and banking, entertainment, communication, it's all been changed because of technology. Though, if you look at the biggest industry in the world has not been changed. It's still operating in the most analog way. And the most analog way is physical land and physical boundaries. These are the ultimate analog industries. So you look at governments, and you look at countries, and you look at nations around the world, there's a couple of interesting insights. One is governments are probably the largest monopolies in the world because there's 190 countries that have the monopoly of land and humans. They're the most analog industries because they still operate with physical land and physical borders. And they're the biggest industries. So the question then is, or the quest, or the experiment here is it possible to create digital countries that don't operate in the framework of the analog world, where everything sits on the cloud, and you're able to then provide government services to people around the world seamlessly, just like you would do communications or entertainment. So that's the framework of the question. And we started Draper Nation as an experiment about 6 months ago to see, can we build a digital country? And within 6 months, we have about 25,000 citizens from every country of the world. We have 190 embassies, basically every country in the world. And it's very fascinating to watch how the idea of a digital country is actually in the forefront of potentially a whole new industry that might come up, which is governments and governance on the internet. And how is that related to AI? Well, if you have a digital country and you're providing government services to people digitally, then surely you could have an AI lawyer, you can have AI healthcare, you can have essentially most government services that are augmented through some sort of a digital intelligence. And secondly, 80% of government services can be done digitally. If you think about your voting, your registrations, your titles, any government services, 80% of government services can be done digitally. So then the question is, well, can we create a digital country that can provide digital government services to billions of people in the world? And then the second sort of insight was, I think people in this room we're privileged because we are parts of countries or parts of the world where we receive something from the government. We pay taxes and the government gives us something in return. But if you think about it, most people in the world are not in that position. Most people in the world don't receive any safety, security, or services from the governments. And we're talking about billions of people. And so is it possible to then create a digital country to then provide those government services to people around the world? So this is all a question mark, and it's all a moonshot sort of an idea. But it's a very exciting idea because no one has really successfully built a digital country, and we are attempting to build one. And so I think a lot of things won't work, but the idea is fascinating. And hopefully, maybe this becomes the new big industry in the world because governments are the biggest industries in the world.
Interesting and inspiring. Vikram Bharati, CEO and founder of Draper Startup House, seated at its headquarters in Singapore, and Saeyoung Lee, CEO of Draper Startup House, Korea. Give them both a hand. I am also co-founder of Draper Startup House in Vietnam. So thank you, gentlemen, for an interesting panel. I'd like to leave half of the session time for Q&A. There are a lot of you out there are experts in your own field, so we want to hear from you, bounce ideas off of us, ask questions from us, and now let us open up the floor to Q&A. Up here in the front, can we have a microphone brought to the person in the front?
Hello, good morning. My name is Hong Sin, and let me put on my hat as ASEAN Chief Information Officer Association. We're a non-profit organization, and this year we conducted the 8th Forum in Philippines, which was just completed, and we had a MOU with KILSA. So my question is directing to what Vikram has presented about a digital country, because next year we're going to host the event in Singapore. And in accordance to our 8 chapters, we have definitely, cutting across that you can imagine when it comes to technology. So I'm interested in the conversation of a digital country. What exactly is digital country in ASEAN? And where can ASEAN CIO Association, where we serve the C-suite, to work together with Draper House? Or is this your own initiative? So I'm really intrigued with that, and I want to know where we can start from there. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, great. Would love to see if we can, So let's talk, and happy to share my thoughts in Singapore for the event, etc. But to maybe share some thoughts on your questions. So when we look at the world, we have sort of divided the world in different segments, right? So we look at ASEAN, which is where that's the entity that you sit in. And we have the EU, we have the associations in Latin America, we have the associations in Africa. These are all segmentations of countries that we have sort of bucketed ourselves in. But if you go back just a few hundred years, there was no ASEAN, there was no EU. They were essentially tribes all around the world. And the identity of humans just a few hundred years ago was not that I'm European or I'm African or I'm American. It was, oh, I am from this tribe. And so our identity has changed from a very small tribe to becoming part of larger groups of people because we live in a world where we can manage that, we can organize. But think about maybe 100 years from today. Is the identity going to grow and grow and grow? Where instead of saying we're ASEAN, we say, oh, well, maybe we're part of one big global community. Is that possible? It's a question mark. I don't know if it's possible or not, but maybe it's possible because we have seen the timeline change from small tribes to larger groups. So, being practical, it makes sense that in the future, those groups will get bigger and bigger and bigger. So if that becomes the case, then how do you organize and manage billions of people based on an old framework of land? It's very hard to move millions of people from one country to the other country. So maybe the solution is then to create a new framework where you can provide services to people through a different entity. And the question I like to think about is like, what is a nation? What is a country? And I think that's ultimately the key question. And maybe one answer is a country or a nation is just a vehicle. It's a vehicle to carry and organize groups of people and to provide them with quality of life. I mean, essentially, that's what a country should be. It's an organization method to organize humans. And so, is it possible to create a new vehicle without the constraints of physical land where it sits on the cloud and then you can provide very quickly government services to billions of people around the world? So these are general question marks that are there, and it's essentially challenging status quo, because I think our status quo today is a framework of a country based on analog systems, which is physical land. And so it's nice in an innovation conference to think about, can we create a new framework for what a country can be? Can we create a new vehicle which maybe is more efficient in terms of delivering services to people? So that's, I hope, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's the general framework that I have in my head. Oh, and this is the Draper Nation project is part of the Draper ecosystem. So it's not an individual project. The Draper ecosystem is probably one of the largest startup ecosystems in the world. So we have Draper Associates, which has funded some of the most iconic transformational technology companies in the world, from free email, from Hotmail, to space, to Tesla, to, we have 39 unicorns in the Draper Associates portfolio. We have Draper University, which is an education, incubation, acceleration program that has university graduates all over the world. We have the Draper Startup Houses, which we talked about earlier, which we're launching in Korea. And now we have a new brand called Draper Nation, which is very experimental, but it's an evolutionary sort of way to think about taking an analog system and creating a digital copy of that.
Thank you. Can we take another question? I see two. How about I saw you first over here on the far left of this stage.
Hi, good morning. Very interesting concept.
Good morning.
I'm Lakshmi from Bangalore, India. I run a startup ecosystem in Bangalore. I think, Vikram, what you articulated about the digital nation is a very interesting concept because even as I was going through the stalls or startups, every startup is looking at building solutions for a global world, right? So where absolutely when you're building a digital solution, there are no boundaries at all. So as Draper Nation, Draper House, Draper Startup House, how do you think through entrepreneurship you'll be able to break borders and help startups build solutions which are universally acceptable?
So we have a little audio conflict with the room next door. Would you mind repeating your question once? Thank you.
I think I heard your question. Yeah, I heard your question. Yeah, I can repeat it. So essentially, what you're asking is, how can the Draper ecosystem, with all the different brands and all the different offerings, help create products and services for entrepreneurs around the world, right? That's sort of like the question. Yeah, so if you look at the framework of a country is the biggest sort of framework you can have to provide services to people because every category is involved in a country, from healthcare to education to innovation to R&D. I mean, any sort of industry you can think sits underneath the umbrella of a country. So the playground is very big, and surely we can't go and tackle everything all at once. Where we are sort of stuck at the moment is, what is the key product that we should launch as a government, as a digital country? And if you have any ideas, I would actually love to hear, because you can't launch, legal services and financial services all at once. So we sort of need one killer product to go to market with that actually is useful, not only for like the 1% of people who have the spending power, but for the masses. So we're trying to figure that out. If you have any ideas, I would love to hear. But I think one interesting thing could be, since this is an AI conference, is for me, I like to look at sovereign wealth funds as a very interesting concept. So I live in Singapore, and Singapore probably has one of the most successful sovereign wealth funds. That essentially was created when Singapore became independent. They had to build a country. So they started a fund to invest in all the things they would need to build a country, whether it's airlines, whether it's hospitals. And so that's a great example of a sovereign wealth fund that actually was useful to build a country. So if you look around the world, there's probably 4 or 5 examples of sovereign wealth funds. Well, if we create a digital country, is it possible to launch a digital sovereign wealth fund that invests in the ideas of the citizens to then collectively build this digital country? So for me, that's a very interesting idea. It could be one killer product to go to market with, or it could be maybe some sort of a healthcare diagnosis or some sort of a telehealth. Because if you look at telehealth, the margins are very high and the costs are very low to do telehealth because you're not providing very complicated diagnosis. You're doing very basic. Most people in the world don't have basic telehealth services, and you can do telehealth on WhatsApp, essentially. So maybe telehealth becomes a killer product to go to market with. So these are all products that we're thinking about, but we're probably going to have to try a lot of these things to find the one that sticks. And so, yeah, we have a long ways to go. I hope that answered your question.
We have a question here in the center.
Hi, good morning, gentlemen. Thanks for all the insightful sharing. My name is Dan, also from Singapore. My question is probably for Saeyoung. I guess for a company or a startup, could you share a little bit more about why would they come to Draper instead of other co-working spaces like your WeWork, JustGo, for example? So it would be good to hear from you, Saeyoung.
Thank you for your question. I can say that in Korea, there are so many incubation centers or accelerators in Korean market, especially including the plug and play and other Y Combinator or Startup 500, etc. But actually, I can say that the Draper Startup is the kind of the truly incubating. We are going to provide the truly incubating services like business strategy review and IR support, and also global networking with the other bunch of offices. So especially in Korea, I can say that there are so many accelerating services, but they cannot provide that how to support the Korea startups to globalize into the other markets. Because there's limited access to the global market, and they have the limited access to the information. So it is hard to figure out what is the core value of each local market and what is the core services for the local market. So that's the reason why the Draper Startup House is the partnership with a bunch of service providers like KILSA and the other services, including the Draper network. So Draper Startup House is kind of gateway to the global Draper network like Draper Ventures, Associate, and Draper Nations, and the other Draper offices. So we have 35 offices in the global market. So finally, we can figuring out what is the optimistic services for the local Korean startups when they are thinking about entering into the global market. That is also vice versa. When you think about entering into the Korean market, we can be a kind of partnership with global startups, how to support, how to serve their customer needs in the Korean market. Yeah.
Thank you, Dan, for the question. One more question over here.
Hello. Morning. My name is TY. I'm from a VC based out in Singapore, so I'm managing partner there. While I say that I'm an entrepreneur first, a money guy second, and like a technologist third. So as an entrepreneur looking for ways to make a lot of money, in Draper Nation, what's the fastest way for someone to get really, really rich in your currency?
So the question is, how does a citizen of a digital country make money very fast? Is that... You must be an investor. Well, so it's an interesting question that I've never heard before. So let me think about that.
Because I can think of how the nation would make a lot of money really quickly, right? If you run a lottery thing that's tied to some bonds that you issue out, basically what the UK government did in the early days, right? The country can make money very quickly.
Yeah.
But as a new citizen, similarly how we have new citizens to the countries every day, their main objective is for a better life for themselves and their family, right? So that's very closely tied to income and wealth.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe let's put it into a larger framework and a context, right? So before the internet, it was hard to really make a lot of money because you would sell products and services in your neighborhood or in your sort of vicinity, your state or your city, right? But as the internet came, all of a sudden, if you look at the curve of the wealthiest people in the world, the curve goes like this. Because then the internet opened the world, opened markets, opened information, opened productivity. So if you were an entrepreneur that rode that internet wave, there is no time in history where you see this hockey stick that goes, right? If you look at history, wealth is like this, essentially. And then all of a sudden, post-industrialization, the hockey stick goes like this, which means a way to make money really fast is to actually use a technology that has exponential potential. So that's a context. So in the future, in a digital country, is it possible to have that hockey stick again? And I think yes, for the following reasons. If you look at the government frameworks today and the nation frameworks today and the frameworks that countries operate in, as we said, it's analog systems, right? So I kind of think of this as a pre-internet. It's analog systems. Trade, information, barriers to import, export, all of these things are analog systems. But now, if you create a new framework with new rails where money can move at an instant and not have to go through, say, the SWIFT network, right? So now we have new money that sits on new rails, which means money can move very, very fast and it can deploy to the right opportunities very quickly. I think that will have an exponential you will see that hockey stick because the movement of money is no longer going to be through that analog system. It's going to be through a new system. So that could be one way that someone could actually make a lot of money. The other is, well, like quick to market. Like in a digital country, there's no barriers, there's no borders. So if you have a digital product and then you have this market of people that sits on the cloud, I mean, you could sell your products to billions of people at a click of a button. And I think that is going to unlock so much wealth. Talent, right? If you're stuck in Gambia or some of these countries in Africa where we actually see a lot of our citizens come from, they're talented, they speak English, they're educated, they have skills, they're making videos, they're making music, but because they live in a construct of an analog country, they're not able to jump that barrier. But with a digital country, maybe they can quickly send their videos or their digital products to the whole world very quickly. That essentially could unlock so much productivity, so much potential. So I actually think that the idea of a digital country will create so much wealth, not for one or two individuals, but for millions and millions of people. Question mark. It's all a question mark, but that's sort of like the general framework.
We have time for more questions. We will keep answering questions until someone tells us to get off the stage. So anyone else here have a question for one of the panelists? Right over here on the right side of the stage. Just a moment, the mic is on the way.
Hello, thank you very much for the presentation. Sorry that I missed half of it. However, I'm not sure that if you respond to this question, but what's your biggest challenge right now in the creation of this digital country? Thank you.
I think the question was, what's our biggest challenge at the moment? Okay, so the idea of the digital nation is 6 months old. We launched this venture 6 months ago, so it's very new. We honestly don't know what we're doing because it's so new. We're just kind of like trying to figure things out on the fly. Where we're at, and this is our biggest challenge, is the following. Idealistically, we want to build a digital country for the masses, for billions of people in the world who don't receive any government services today from their governments. So idealistically, that's what we want to do. Practically, the masses don't have a lot of the masses don't have the spending power to create a sustainable business model or a sustainable economy. So the 1% of our audience are the people who can actually pay for things and have the spending power. So the conundrum here is, do we build products and services for the masses, because that's essentially what we want to do, or do we start with the 1% of people who have the spending power? So that's kind of like where we're stuck, and conventional wisdom is that you should go for the 1%. Build products and services for the people who can pay for things, create a sustainable economy, a sustainable business model, and then trickle that down to the masses. That's conventional wisdom. And I think that's the advice of every single person I have spoken to, because that's the way people do it. But I am not sure if that's the right way for us to do it. Because it's conventional wisdom, I'm kind of thinking we should probably go the other way and try to do something that's not the norm. Maybe that's a bad idea, maybe, but that's kind of like our biggest challenge at the moment, is deciding which way to go and for whom to build the first sets of products and services. So if you have any ideas, let us know.
More questions? Or anyone want to add anything? Yes, please.
Hey, as you think about globalization, pretty much what you've discussed, right? what role does partnerships play, and how have you strategized in terms of different partners to enter different markets? I mean, that's my cheat code, right? Go and find a big fish, be the small fish, and grow with them. How do you guys look at that?
Yeah, so the question was where's the role of partnerships? So is that specifically for Draper Nation or maybe for Saeyoung, for Draper Startup? Do you want to talk about partnerships? Do you want to talk about partnerships or? Oh, okay, all right. All right, so question is, where does the role of partnerships play? And maybe I can answer this in the context of a digital country. Well, I look at myself and I go, I was born in India. I moved to the United States when I was very young. I naturalized, became a U.S. citizen. And then I spent the rest of my life traveling around the world, and now I live in Singapore. And so I sort of look at I don't live where I was born. I don't work where I am a citizen of. I'm kind of like a nomad living in a different country. And I think a lot of people, that's becoming the norm for masses of people. So just because you were born in a country doesn't necessarily mean you have to live in that country, right? People migrate for work and for all sorts of reasons. So as a digital country, people usually say, well, what about land? Where are people going to live? And so my framework is, well, you don't have to live where you were born. And so I think this is where partnerships can come into the mix. Because I envision a digital country that does everything a government does except for the land, which is 80% of government services. So then what do you do for the land? Well, I think that's where the partnerships come in. And if you look at treaties and trade agreements, that's exactly what it is, right? If you're a South Korean, you show up to a country with a passport, they let you in. That's a trade agreement. That's a treaty that countries have with each other, is to allow people to move, allow people to trade with each other. So why can't a digital country have these partnerships as trade agreements where I can go to, say, a small island nation and say, okay, people who hold the passport of this digital country can have access to your markets, to come into your country, etc. So I think once a digital country, whoever is the first digital country to start building these treaties and trade agreements, that then essentially becomes a normal country. Now, will there be sovereignty and recognition by other countries? Probably not. I think that's a very long political battle. But the idea of trade agreements is essentially partnerships. And if you look at normal trade agreements, it's very basics, right? Like, I make bananas, I will sell you bananas, and you give me apples. I mean, that's a trade agreement. And so why can a digital country do that, to say, the citizens of this country are very creative, they have new ideas for a nuclear reactor. We'll sell you that idea, and you give us bananas in return. I mean, so I kind of see that as potential partnership models for a digital country.
All right. Have we any more questions or comments, or anyone want to add anything or ideas? One more in the front, please.
Thank you. If I may add, based on what Vikram you were talking about, like nations, combining nations of, over a spread of geographical. So let me just talk about ASEAN, because I'm doing the work in ASEAN. And within ASEAN itself, there are a lot of framework. When you talk about trade agreement, there is going to be a ASEAN trade agreement across ASEAN. I can't talk about the rest yet, but our 8th forum, ASEAN Secretariat, actually lists out a good list of agreements, alignment, even plans. So I'm definitely keen to explore what you're talking about, building a digital nation, because the next year 9 forum is going to be in Singapore, and we're talking about shaping the leadership, towards an evolving ASEAN. So you gave me the idea this morning to talk about what exactly is digital? What does it mean when you talk about digital nation? So there were also a lot of the speakers that talks about how to make money, how to live life. And you mentioned about, the imagination of getting onto cloud. I think all these, we require a lot of education, but we need to start somewhere. And if that somewhere cannot be the whole world yet, but if ASEAN starts that movement, I mean, obviously there are many considerations, especially when you talk about the use of sovereign fund. Across ASEAN, there aren't that many sovereign funds, or not all the countries have that in terms of assessing or building up the sovereign fund. So I think there is somewhere that we can work together with the vision that Draper's, is envisioning for that digital nation conversation. So I will take this offline to have that discussion, because I'm doing the planning for the 9th forum, which is very important in the course of work, because we're bringing in C-suite, the leaders that are going to make this decision. So I'm really keen to see how we can take this further. And of course, with KILSA help, I think we can do a lot more things together. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, let's talk. And I think, one of the interesting topics that I'm learning about is I did not realize how many special economic zones there are in the world. I thought it was a very few. There's thousands and thousands of special economic zones around the world. I mean, each country has dozens of special economic zones. I think Korea has a bunch of special economic zones, right? So there are some reference points, because a special economic zone is essentially you carve out a piece of area to say sandbox, experiment, and special tax regimes. So I think the idea of a digital nation, in a way, is not that different from a special economic zone, which the analog world has experience with. So can you create a digital special economic zone, which essentially could be a digital country? That's one idea. And then the second idea is, I think when we think of creating new countries, all of a sudden we go into this analog flight or fight mode where we say it's competition, you're going to take away from us. But I actually think a digital country is an augmentation. It's not a competition to physical countries. It could be the new vehicle to actually make the lives of humans better in every country of the world. So it could be an augmentation as opposed to a competition. So I kind of see Draper Nation as a partner of countries around the world to say, well, we have this cohort of millions of people. We can have bargaining power to create better insurance regimes, better healthcare regimes. Maybe we have so much more data about medical records that we can actually create a health AI doctor that does telehealth over WhatsApp. And so I actually think it's about unlocking productivity and augmenting what physical countries cannot do. Physical countries have a lot of political baggage, rightfully so, historical baggage, cultural baggage, language baggage. So what's the solution? How do you take billions of people and provide a better life for them? You can't move them physically, it's just not possible. So it has to be a new solution. It has to be a digital solution. And so, yeah, looking forward to chatting for sure. Thanks.
Another question from the audience. Philip, thank you. Philip from KILSA Global.
Can you hear me? Hey, first of all, thanks for your great panel discussion, a lot of insights. Yeah, definitely I have an understanding about all these kind of things, and we're going to have a discussion outside. But, okay, for me, the Draper always is one word, if I can define, as what you try to do is actually building up community. Okay? So whether it's a digital community, whether it's a digital nomad community using co-working space, which is a Draper Startup House, So you try to build up different formats of a community. Today I heard a lot of digital nation, right? And then we are also talking about Draper Startup House, which is a physical platform, right? As a KILSA, definitely we are quite honored to be part of this ecosystem, to provide service, to play as a role as a service platform. But my question is, I mean, maybe it's a question to both of you, Vikram and then Saeyoung. How do you see each other? I mean, digital platform, digital community, which is very innovative concept of new way of the borderless, right? And then we also try to build up some sort of a new way of co-working, co-living, co-sharing economy, which is very physical, right? So it's a real world, there's a digital world. How do you see each other? I mean, how do you see the real world to see how do you want to interfunction with the digital platform? How do you want to, digital nation want to interfunction? And then how do you want to use or operate with the real world? Yeah, just some curious.
And, digital Draper nation is a pretty much big concept. So I believe that Vikram can be kind of president of the Draper nations to conquer the world. So that's the maybe his agenda, I think. Anyhow, this is joke. So as a Draper Startup House, I believe that the Draper nation is kind of expanded concept how to communicate with the world. So Draper startups are any of the physical place to support their startups and to provide their living space for their startup, the entrepreneurs, the bunch of services we are now providing. But using the Draper nations or a Draper network in digital world, we can make a more synergy because we can meet the more people. Because the physical space is pretty much limited to interact with the real world, real people in the community. But through the Draper nations or Draper, the digital world, we can meet the more people from the world wide. So which means that we can make a more interactions, network, and we can make more synergies, which means that we can create the more values through the digital world. So I believe that the power of the digital world, the Draper nations, and also we think that we don't know what is the limit of that Draper nations can create in terms of value. So maybe Draper startup is a kind of real field and the real services in the world, but we want to communicate more actively with the Draper nations so it can make us some more new world. Yeah.
So thanks for that, Saeyoung. I think there's some analogies to countries today. I see embassies, like every country has an embassy in some other country. And these embassies are physical representations of this cultural identity called a country. And that embassy becomes the sovereignty of that country in another country. And essentially that's an embassy. So I see the physical startup houses as like embassies of a digital country. And you know, that's not so far-fetched. Potentially that becomes like the structure where we have a startup house in every city in the world, and this physical startup house is the embassy of this digital country, where humans come in person in real life to trade, to talk, to build relationships, to build bonds, and then also interact with other people of that city and that country. So yeah, I think there is that's an analogy that I think we're familiar with. So potentially that becomes a framework for the digital country.
Thank you, Vikram. Vikram BHARATI, CEO of Draper Startup House and Draper Nation, and Saeyoung Lee, CEO of Draper Startup House Korea, and I'm Country Director of Draper Startup House Vietnam. Thank you for your time and attention. Thank you for your questions. You can think of a Draper Startup House as a landing place if you're an entrepreneur, and if you're an SME, you can think of the KILSA Global Field Offices as your landing place, and we work together very closely, all of us. Once again, how about a round of applause for our panelists? And enjoy the rest of your day. Please visit our pavilions. We have pavilions in the far end of the hall, in the fostering zone, which are representing countries that are in the KILSA Global Network. And we've brought 5 to 7 startups from each country. Please take a look at them, ask questions, and learn more about the products and services that they're featuring today. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon.